Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
Okay, we got more updates to the Browns head coaching search situation. I got to go back and look up how long it took the Browns to fulfill their head coaching position the last time they had an opening. I have to imagine this is a longer search than that, but I'm not 100% sure. But the news here is that Mike McDaniel, who was scheduled for a second interview tomorrow, has decided to withdraw his name from candidacy of the Cleveland Browns head coaching job ahead of his offensive coordinator interview for the Chargers. Now, we're talking about Mike McDaniel's future. I think the Chargers OC job makes a lot more sense for him than taking the Browns head coaching job, just because there is a quarterback to work with. It's a stable situation where you know you're not going to get fired in a year. Like, there are some of the jobs that were available for Mike. Like, if he took the Washington Commanders job, feels like Dan Quinn's about to get fired. Yeah, you're working with a quarterback, but the situation doesn't seem stable. I think that Chargers job has a good mix of the stability there. I wonder if that's where he ends up, because I think that could be a good spot for him. But he took his name out the candidacy for the Cleveland Browns job. And this is not, I don't think this is great news for the Browns. I don't know if the Browns are leaning towards hiring Mike McDaniel, but I thought Mike McDaniel made a lot more sense for the Browns head coaching opening than I think a lot of people are willing to give credit to, just because right now the public opinion on Mike is just so low, right? Because of his work the last couple of years in Miami. You know, at the end of the day, what I thought Mike brought to the job is that he is a very good run game coordinator, and he's a very proven passing game coordinator, and he's somebody who can work and stay ahead of the curve offensively. The big question with him is, how good is he at the management stuff, right? If he takes an offensive coordinator job, I think that allows him room to get better at the management stuff, especially if he's taking a job under Jim Harbaugh, where, you know, that's what Jim Harbaugh does really well, is the management, the locker room stuff. That's where the Harbaughs thrive. So taking a job under one of the Harbaughs makes a ton of sense for Mike McDaniels, especially like given what he needs to improve. But that's the big question with Mike, right? How does he handle the locker room stuff? Is he good there? But this is a solid candidate for the Cleveland Browns that is, unfortunately for them, now off the board, which means we got to look at who's left and ask ourselves, okay, who do you want, right? That's the big question here. So the guys that the Browns originally interviewed, Todd Monken, who has gotten a second interview and has completed his second interview. Dan Pitcher, only interviewed on the first round, was not put in the second round of interviews. I think maybe the dropping out of Mike McDaniel might push Dan Pitcher into consideration again. Tommy Reese, who was eliminated from the search, he's the only one right now that we know has been voluntarily eliminated. Well, not voluntarily, has been eliminated involuntarily by the Cleveland Browns from consideration, which makes sense. Jim Schwartz, who has a interview and has done his second interview. Aiden Dorte, who interviewed but did not get a second interview or doesn't have one scheduled yet. Mike McDaniel, obviously we just talked about him. Jesse Minter, and Jesse Minter is scheduled for a second interview, but it is believed that Jesse Minter is likely to take the Baltimore job, which is interesting. And then there's Grant Udesky, offensive coordinator out of Jacksonville, who's been interviewed and is scheduled for a second interview. The Browns also requested Chris Shula, but it doesn't look like they're going to get an interview with Chris Shula. Nate Scalise, who they did interview and now are bringing in for a second interview. Now, there are some other things that need to be cleared, right? The Browns need to do an in-person interview to satisfy the Rooney Rule and things such as that. But if we're talking about who this job is going to come down to, right now, right, because we don't know if that Dan Pitcher's going to get that second interview because of somebody dropping out or somebody's going to replace McDaniel in the running there. Right now, you got Grant, who seems like the favorite. If you look at all the betting odds, Grant Udinski is the favorite. Grant Udinski, my bad, is the favorite. I thought Mike McDaniel had a better shot than most, and then there's Jim Schwartz. If you're asking me, before I even get deep into this video, right, if you're asking me what I would rather do between Jim Schwartz and Grant Udinski, I'd rather hire Grant Udinski. I'm going to explain why that would be the case in just a second, but first I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper.
Hey, have you ever heard of the Sleeper app? Well, here's a fun secret. It's not just for fantasy leagues. It's great for fantasy leagues. I personally have used it for years with my college friends to play fantasy football and to do pick'em leagues, all sorts of fun stuff like that. But the Sleeper app also gives you news. It gives you scores. You can also try to turn your football knowledge into real money. Just download the Sleeper app and pick more or less on your favorite players with more stats than any other daily fantasy app. Just choose 2 or more of your favorite players from pregame or live. Pick more or less from the predicted stats, and you could win up to 100 times your money if your picks win. Use promo code WORSTTAKE, and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Again, promo code WORSTTAKE. You'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Links are in the description.
There's another name that has been thrown out there, Nate Schillhouse, right? The passing game coordinator for the Rams. The big issue with him is, one, a lack of NFL experience. Nate Schillhouse, only 3 years in the NFL. Correct me if I'm wrong. He does have experience in college, right? I believe he worked under Matt Campbell at Iowa State, but not a ton of experience in the NFL, right? So Illinois, Iowa State, and then Los Angeles for not even 3 years of NFL experience, 2 years of NFL experience. So very inexperienced when it comes to the NFL, super inexperienced. Thought of as an interesting offensive mind at Iowa State and has done some things that have impressed people at Los Angeles. The big thing with him is, one, the lack of experience is significant. 2, he has not available to be interviewed until the 26th. And that matters because you're already going to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to hiring out a staff, because you're hiring somebody that inexperienced, right? You know, Nate Schillhouse has not been in the NFL long enough to have a deep tree of coaches you would think that he can go to and fill out a staff and ask for favors and call in stuff and get people to work with them. Like, it's not that kind of a situation. So you're already working from behind the 8 ball there. And then you're hiring the coach this late into the cycle, and your choices from what's available already from a disconnected position is just less. So that would be the big argument against Schillhouse. And it's kind of an argument against Grant Udinski, right? Like, when you look at Grant Udinski, you have to ask yourself, okay, you might think he's a genius on the offensive side of the ball. You might think he has a charismatic personality that will get him buy-in from the locker room. All those things could be true. But who does he know to hire the staff? Does he know enough people? Does he have good enough relationships to know enough people to make it happen? That's the big thing with Grant, right? When you're hiring somebody with 2 years of NFL experience, even when they're 35, like Nate Schillhouse, or you're hiring somebody who has 6 years of NFL experience in Grant Udinski, but only 1 year of experience being in charge, how do you know who you would want to work under you if you got promoted when you just got promoted to being in charge last year, right? There are a lot of people, like, I try to relate to it in my life, and you can use whatever connects to your life to relate to it. But it's like, if I somehow got a job where I'm running a sports media department for a network, that would be very difficult for me to find people to fill roles because, if I only had 1 year of experience in being in charge of a department, I don't have a big Rolodex of folks that I've worked with or have worked for me before. That's kind of the situation Grant's in. Maybe it's a nothing burger, right? And he's able to hire coaches and have these great relationships and do everything he needs to do. Maybe it might be something that defines his running Cleveland. You can't underrate it, right? I know people will point to Sean McVay being 30, but you can't just say everybody's going to be Sean McVay, one. And two, Sean McVay had 3 years of experience being in charge as an offensive coordinator before he got the head coaching job. So deeper Rolodex there. That's the big question with Udinski. Can he fill out his staff? And do you feel confident that this guy at 30 is going to be able to get buy-in from coaches who are more experienced than him and older than him? Are you confident in his ability to do that? You got to be confident in that ability. The issue with hiring Jim Schwartz is simple to me. I think Jim Schwartz is not that much less risky than Grant. Like, I think people look at it and say to themselves, Jim Schwartz is less risky. Jim Schwartz is the safe option because Jim Schwartz is a more familiar name. I don't know if that's the case, right? I think I said it in a video before. I've seen a lot of head coaches come in here with a ton of experience and win 4 games. I've seen a lot of head coaches come in here with no experience and win 4 games, right? It does not take much to stink in the NFL. You can be experienced and be dysfunctional. I've seen experienced coaches come in here, be dysfunctional. You can not have a ton of experience and be pretty functional. Like, for everything that Mike Pettin dealt with, right, in 2014 and 15, I thought Mike Pettin did a pretty solid job running what he could run that he was allowed to be in charge of the organization. Then you go back and you think of like Eric Mangini when he ran the Browns, and he had all that experience, and he was the most dysfunctional the franchise has ever been. At least that head coach. Maybe outside of Freddie Kitchens, who was inexperienced. So I don't know how much safer Jim Schwartz is because, yeah, Jim Schwartz has more experience. Yes, Jim Schwartz has experience in this building, but Jim Schwartz has not been a good head coach when he's had the opportunity to be a head coach. Jim Schwartz is largely credited for wasting a good chunk of Calvin Johnson and, Matt Stafford's career. It's amazing to look at what Matt Stafford's doing at his age right now and to think that he wasn't doing any of this when he was on the Detroit Lions. It's crazy to think. Like, how can you have a great quarterback like that and not be successful as a head coach? That's Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz had a good quarterback. He wasn't successful. Gotta figure that one out. What went wrong there? Maybe he's learned in the 10 years since he's been a head coach. But it's greatly concerning. And then the biggest concern of it all, what makes you think Jim Schwartz is going to be able to figure out this offense? Not as an offensive mind. Obviously, Jim's not going to run the offense. But what about Jim Schwartz's tree screams like relevant? Like they got the young offensive minds on it. Like, do you trust Jim Schwartz's ability to bring in a offensive mind that's going to be able to fix this team? Maybe they think they can pair him up with one of the guys they interviewed for the head coaching job, but I'm not confident about that. And again, if we look at Jim Schwartz's track record, it's just a long list of offensive coordinators who couldn't make offenses happen with Calvin Johnson and Matthew Stafford. I'd be concerned. Yeah, Jim's more experienced. Jim's been in the league longer. We're more familiar with Jim Schwartz. Was he really less risky than Grant Udinski? Is he significantly less risky? I think they're both pretty risky hires, except for one has the upside of being able to solve your problems offensively and get you ahead of the curve. And the other one has the upside of maintaining the status quo. But both come with significant risk. I don't think the Browns should let risk and safe dictate this coaching search. If you want it safe, if you wanted to avoid risk, should have just kept Kevin. That was the safest thing to do, is to keep Kevin. They chose to be a little bit more bold and fire Kevin, which I don't mind. I think Kevin was right to be fired. What he had done the last 2 years was justifiable in him being fired. I don't understand why you would take the risk in firing Kevin to then revert back to trying to be safe in taking the risk in hiring Jim Schwartz. Just doesn't make the most sense to me. Grant Udensky, albeit incredibly inexperienced, incredibly young, at least I can say to myself, I get how they got here with the process. I don't know if that's going to work out. I'm incredibly nervous about a 30-year-old head coach. But at least I can't blame the process or act like the process does not make sense, because it does. It's just I might not like the results that the process pushed out. We'll see what happens. Keep an eye on the situation. I'll keep you updated. Make sure you subscribe and notified. You have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.